Martin Scorsese's film Shutter Island is a neo-noir psychological thriller set in 1954. Leonardo DiCaprio plays US Marshal Teddy Daniels, who visits the island with his partner to investigate the disappearance of a patient from the hospital for the criminally insane. His ulterior motive is to find his wife's killer, who is rumoured to be an inmate there. Through many twists and turns, Teddy eventually discovers, spoiler alert, that he is in fact an inmate and his wife's killer. Though the situation was set up to make him face reality, he maintains his fantasy, the truth being too much to bear. Teddy is taken away to be lobotomised, but not before asking the psychiatrist whether it would be worse to live as a monster or to die as a good man, suggesting he has neither regressed fully into his fantasy nor progressed to facing the truth. Not the film to watch if you're looking for a few laughs to combat cabin fever. But it very successfully examines how hard it can be to discern the real truth of things. Some things in life are complicated, and there are many facts and evaluations, many of them contested, politicised, even weaponised. Just think of all the controversy and confusion there's been around our pandemic and the appropriate responses, vaccines and lockdowns. We may be disinclined to do the hard thinking or lack the self-confidence to try. Modernity, after all, teaches us that there is no reality out there to know anyway, and that the most we can hope for is something truthish in a world of alternative facts. But there are other reasons for our reticence. If we look too hard at our world or ourselves, we might not like what we see. Things like our pandemic might incline us to putting our head in the sand, or like Teddy, to indulging various illusions. But the truth continues to interrogate us regarding our social structures, institutions, and practices. Even more confronting, it shines light on our personal lives, the proud bits and the sordid, the wise and the prejudiced. It exposes our inhumane behaviour, poor relating and self-centeredness, our unfaithfulness to each other and to God. Truth tells us we are very gifted, virtuous, generous people, but can reproach us about how we use those gifts, the vices choking the virtues in the garden of our souls, the limits to our generosity. So it's not just because truth is so hard to capture and communicate that modernity avoids it like the COVID. It's because it's so disturbing. Truth demands intellectual, moral, and spiritual conversion. And we often resist. Often in life, we go for what's easiest rather than what's best. Just think of what drives many people's voting come election time. The same is true when it comes to choosing who or what is sovereign in our lives. In our first reading, God and Joshua have had enough. The people are told that since they're not following the God of Israel, they might as well adopt some of their neighbours' gods. Frightening gods, these, unlike Israel's God of mercy and compassion. Gods like the stormy weather god Amaru of the Amorites, his bloodthirsty queen and their 70 divine sons. Or the jackal-headed Egyptian god of the underworld Anubis, his half-pharaoh, half-mummy successor Osiris, and his murderer Seth, the god of chaos and violence. Or Osiris's sister and wife, Isis, who wears the horns of a cow and a solar disk, and their falcon-headed son Horus, god of war and hunting. Go join them, Joshua teases, if you won't serve the one true God. So too in our gospel. After hearing Jesus' strange doctrine of the Eucharist, some disciples abandon him. He might bring the truth or be the truth itself, but truth is too much for some. On Shutter Island, in ancient Israel, even in the contemporary church. Does my teaching upset you? Jesus asks. He won't dilute the gospel for popularity's sake. Unconvinced by his signs and teachings, they're unlikely to acknowledge him even if he ascends to heaven. Just as Teddy Daniels prefers madness to truth, so too in Jesus we come face to face with truth. And some do not welcome this. Before we join exasperated Joshua in judging ancient Israel, or Jesus, the just judge, in assessing them a millennium later, we should attend to a crucial fact. That in today's readings, it's the faithful who defy the God of Israel, not the surrounding tribes. The faithful who resist Jesus, not the civic and religious authorities. John tells us that after this, many of his disciples left Jesus and stopped going with him. It was Christians who resisted his hard teachings, insiders as much as the still to be so. These disciples are us. We may not leave Jesus altogether, but at one time or another we wander down some side path, some imagined shortcut to happiness. We resist those parts of faith or morals that don't suit us or demand too much. Surveys suggest, for instance, that a significant proportion of those who identify as Catholic today reject some core teachings of the faith. Even some Mass-goers deny that in the Eucharist we receive the very substance of Jesus, God and man. They too are uncomfortable with Jesus' words, "I am the bread of life come down from heaven. Whoever eats this bread will live forever. And that bread is my flesh, given for the life of the world. Those who eat my flesh and drink my blood abide in me, and I in them." A hard teaching indeed, but a clear one. So response A is to abandon Christ, wholly or in part. But our story identifies another possibility. Some stay close to Jesus and his church. "Lord, to whom shall we go?" asked Peter. "You have the words of eternal life, and we believe that you are the Holy One of God." As we offer today the Mass in time of pandemic, we are aware that it is only the one who is food of minds and souls who can bring us healing and protection, the courage and compassion we need in times like these. So the apostles stayed all the way to that supper when they finally received his body and blood at last, convinced, like all the saints since, that however uncomfortable it can be at times, truth is freedom. Truth liberates us from falsehood, superstition, fear, from the mirages created by various interests and the illusions we create for ourselves. Truth disillusions without making us cynical. It releases the spirit from unnecessary anxiety. It heals inauthenticity, the division of heart that is so corrupting. Only truth sets us free. Free from all that holds us back from being all we should be. Free to love and serve. Back in the 50s, the brilliant and feisty Southern writer Flannery O'Connor was listening uncomfortably to a group of socialites sharing their fancies. After listening to a Catholic woman prating on about the symbol of the Eucharist, Flannery had had enough. I then said in a very shaky voice, "Well, if it's just a symbol, to hell with it." That was all the defence I was capable of at that time. But I realise now that this is all I will ever be able to say about it, outside of a story, except that it is the centre of existence for me. All the rest of life is expendable. That's option B. The choice for Christ, who is the bread of life and truth incarnate. A choice made not just once for all time, but each day, and especially every Sunday. Which will we choose?